Seventh Adventist Church Sabbath School. There are handouts today. As you come in, you can pick them up. As I studied the lesson, I noticed that if I stepped back and took a look at the big picture, that the individual components that we're looking at this session, like a puzzle, fit in that big picture, that it was very helpful for me to step back and take an airplane look at what the lessons really are about this quarter. And it's a focus on God desiring a loving relationship response from people. And you know that if you love and take the initiative, sometimes it takes a while to generate a response in those that you care about. And the covenant that God entered into with the children of Israel at Sinai was his initiative to do something special with his people, that they would be enriched and blessed and wholesomely benefited by that relationship, and that they would be a channel of goodness to the world. And we focus in on the time they are Sinai, and that's okay. But I think we all recognize that the picture is a little bigger than that. It really starts in about chapter 5 instead of chapter 19. And that is where Moses goes into Egypt and tells Pharaoh, "Let my people go. I want to bring my people to myself," and Pharaoh resisting them. And by the time you get to chapter 12, 14, that's the time when God finally leverages Egypt to let my people go. But what a price they paid for resistance. Can you imagine how much they lost? Even their own leaders said the nation is devastated. People, cattle, our crops are gone. And they finally told the children of Israel, "Get out of here. Go," which they could have done very early, but they resisted. And so God delivered them, and you can imagine the joy in the hearts of these people as they were liberated. And in chapter 15, they sing the song of deliverance, the song of Moses, and Marion led out in that. And then they come into the wilderness, and they have bitter water, and God heals the water. And then in chapter 16, they have no food, they run out of food, and God gives them heavenly manna. And anyone know how long that manna lasted? How long did that manna last? It did, yeah. The manna they got lasted for one day, but how long did God provide the manna for them? 40 years? Yes, 6 days a week, correct. And on the sixth day, they got double. But they had it all through the wilderness time, but when they went across the Jordan to the place called Gilgal, it says that's when the manna ceased, because they now have access to the food in Canaan. So that's chapter 16. Chapter 17, they ran out of food, and he provides them food. And chapter 17 to the end, they also had the Amalekites attack them, and he defeated the Amalekites. So he gave a demonstration of his power to Egypt. Then he delivers them across the Red Seas and opens the Red Sea. He provides water, food, and protection. That's all part of his demonstration. And it has not been difficult to enjoy that. They finally come to chapter 19, and that's the chapter at Sinai. And the chapter of Sinai, we know that's where God says, "I want to make a covenant with you. If you will enter into a love relationship with me, then you will be a special people to me, and I'll be God to you." And chapter 19 and 20 talks about the expression from Sinai, and chapter 20 is where he gives the Ten Commandments. I'm just going to give it a little overview first. Now, part of our thinking tends to stop there, at least it did for me for many years. But if you just take a look at the big picture, that which their experience on Sinai, the giving of the covenant, actually goes, it doesn't stop at chapter 19 and 20. It goes all the way to chapter 31. All the way to 31 before there's a change and the people make the golden calf. And so I want to give a picture of that this morning. But as an overview, chapter 19 and 20, he gives the Ten Commandments from Sinai. Chapter 21 to 24, he gives from Sinai the application of what it means to love God and love your fellow man. And they're known as the judgments or the ordinances or the laws, statutes that they were to follow. And that follows the Ten Commandments, chapter 21 to 24. And then in chapter 25, he says, now you're my people, so I want to come and tabernacle with you. So make a sanctuary for me so I can come and tabernacle with you. And chapter 25 to 31 is the story of their God-giving description of how they were to build this tabernacle, the articles of furniture in it, the size of the court and the tabernacle, the role of the priests. And then ultimately in chapter 31, he ratifies that. He gives a sign of what the covenant is. And it's actually in chapter 31 that he gives the ultimate, this is the sign of the covenant. And I notice we're going to spend a whole lesson on that. So if you step back, it's important to see that the covenant of Sinai really has the introduction of what God does to his people, entering into a covenant relationship, giving the law of the covenant, which is the Ten Commandments, then the statutes and judgments and oracles, which are the application. And then he says, I want to worship with you, so make a sanctuary. And by the way, this is the sign of the covenant. So when you think of the covenant of Sinai, think of it in that big picture, and we'll break down today that into smaller lumps. So I've given you a handout that's going to give an overview of this, and we'll do an overview, but you'll have time to study it a little more when you get home. So in chapter 19, 4 and 6, he says, you've seen what I've done to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings, I brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So God told Moses this, and he went down and told the people. So God demonstrated his love and care for his people and desired to make a covenant with them and give them special advantages so they would be able to be channels of his love. Now, many times a covenant is between two equals, and so each has an input on what they would like in that arrangement. Marriage is a covenant, and it's between two equals. Sometimes you have a covenant between a dominant, like a king that conquered a country, and hey, this is the rules that's going to take place. This is the arrangement. Sometimes it's a covenant between God and his people. So you'll notice in this covenant, the people did not have input. They weren't saying, okay, God, let's see. This is what I would like to be part of that covenant. And God says, no, that's not the way to work. I know what's best for you. This is the arrangement. Are you comfortable with it or uncomfortable? Have I demonstrated that I love you? Can you accept that demonstration? And so it's not a covenant between two equals. It's a covenant between God and his people that he has chosen. God took the initiative to choose them. They didn't take the initiative. So God's covenant is between a sovereign God, a delivered people from slavery. It was God's initiative. God prepared, God delivered, with no input from the people except to agree or disagree. So as I looked at this overall that we're looking at this quarter, and in particular today, it really has several components, and I've listed them. You really have the setting in which the covenant takes place. You have the God of the covenant. You have the people of the covenant. You have the law of the covenant. You have the judgment or the rules that came out of that covenant. You have the book of the covenant. You have the ratification of the covenant. And you have the presence of God in the covenant. And finally, you have the sign of the covenant. All this is around covenant. Often we just think about Sinai and it's given the Ten Commandments, that is the covenant. That is part of it, but it's not the big picture. The big picture is all the way from the deliverance of the children of Israel, starting about chapter 5 and goes way to chapter 31. So let's just take a look at each component. We've already spoken a little bit of what about the setting of the covenant. The setting of the covenant, God says, you have seen what I have done to show my love for you. You were slaves in Egypt. I delivered you from Egypt. I showed you my power and my strength against the greatest nation in the world. And they had to humble before you, and I delivered you through the Red Sea. I provided water for you. I provided bread for you. I protected you from your enemies. Now you have seen the demonstration. Do we like to see a demonstration of love for someone that's pursuing us and says, hey, I love you? Sure, we want to see a demonstration. And God did that. He gave that demonstration. So, in chapter 9, verse 16, God calls the people to himself at the mountain. He says, take 3 days to prepare. Make sure your clothes are washed. Make sure that you sanctify yourself and get ready for the meeting. It's really interesting to read the response of the people in that. Sometimes we say, okay, they heard the covenant and they simply said, all that the Lord has said we will do. And that's not so. When they came up to the mountain and you come to God speaking the Ten Commandments, that's fine. They come up. They prepared themselves. Chapter 20 tells how God speaks the Ten Commandments. But what happens in the preparation for the speaking of the Ten Commandments? If you come to verse 16, then it came to pass on the third day, this is chapter 19, verse 16. Then it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were encamped did what? How did the people respond when God blew the trumpet, had angels blow the trumpet from Sinai? How did the people respond? What's the word that's per verse 16? They trembled. They trembled. They trembled before God. And Moses brought the people to the camp to meet with God and stood at the foot of the mountain. Now, Mount Sinai was complete in smoke because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Can you imagine God himself coming down on top of the mountain? Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, so you can think of atomic mushroom. And the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke and God answered him in voice. Now, if you come to the end of then he gives the Ten Commandments and come to the end of the chapter in verse 18. Now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightnings, the flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. And they said to Moses, you speak to us, and we will hear. But let not God speak to us, lest we die. And Moses said to the people, do not fear, for the God has come to test you, and that his fear may be before you, so that you will not sin. Isn't that interesting? He wanted to manifest his power and his glory and his majesty. The mountain shook, the lightning and a trumpet louder and louder and louder, and the people shook. And it says God wants you to be impressed. He's not a wimp. He's a mighty God. And so that you will tremble, and it will help prevent you from making decisions against him. Now, that gives you a little insight on the word fear of the Lord. Yeah, it's respect, but it's more than respect. It's also, hey, tremble a little bit. You're not fooling around with a wimp. You're fooling around with a God of mighty power. So the people do not say there, all that the Lord has said we will do. Now, it's true, and we'll talk about that a little later. The leaders do all that the Lord has said we will do, but the people don't do it until after the judgments. So the setting of the covenant is a mighty God, shows his love, and he says, will you enter into a special arrangement with me? There's not a whole lot you have to input on. I'm going to provide you. I've already done so. But will you be willing to be mine? So, number B, the God of the covenant. You've seen what I've done with the Egyptians. I bore you in eagle's wings, brought you to myself. We've covered that. And in Exodus 19:7-8, you have the response of the elders of the people. And it says in Exodus 19:7-8, so Moses came and called the elders of the people. That's before he brings all the congregation. The elders of the people, and laid before them all the words which the Lord commanded him. Then all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. That's what the leaders say. So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So you're getting a picture of God, which is pretty majestic and all-powerful, all-providing, protector. He is one that, wow, if he can protect and he can provide and he can deliver, he's the kind of God I want on my side. Now, the elders respond when Moses tells them what God wants to enter into covenant relationship. How do the people respond? Well, we just read what the elders did in A, but how do the people respond? And we already covered that. Now all the people witnessed the thundering, the lightnings, the flashes, the trumpet that got louder and louder. And they said, Moses, you speak to us or we're going to die. Do not be of fear, for God has come to test you, and that his fear may be before your eyes, so that you may not sin. So the people stood afar off, but Moses drew near to the thick darkness. And chapter 24, verse 7. And here is again, here is now where the people say all that the Lord say. You had the elders say it first in chapter 19. And after he gives the 10 Commandments, the people say, Moses, you speak to us, not God. Then he gives the judgments. And at the end of the judgments in chapter 24, he has now the 10 Commandments and the ordinances, or the statutes and judgments, the combination of those, which would be the book of the covenant. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that the Lord has said we will do. So they were willing to enter into that relationship. So the book of the covenant, if you take the context, covers from chapter 19 to chapter 24. It's the giving of the 10 Commandments, and it's the giving of the statutes or judgments that cover, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then when the people hear the combination of those two, they said, all that the Lord has said, we will do. So number D, the law of the covenant. Sometimes you may have heard in the past, people say, what's the covenant of Sinai? And they'll say, well, the covenant of Sinai is the 10 Commandments. Well, all right. It's the law of the covenant is the 10 Commandments. The setting of the covenant is that deliverance and providing. The God of the covenant is the creator who brought them to himself like on eagle's wings. So you have the setting of the covenant, you have the God of the covenant, and you have the people of the covenant, which is Israel, and the law of the covenant. What is the guiding principles of the covenant relationship? And that's the 10 Commandments. And I put some text here for you outside of this particular setting of Exodus. Deuteronomy 4:13 says, So they declared to you that his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, which is what? The 10 Commandments. And he wrote them on 2 tables of stone, Deuteronomy 9:15. So I turned and came down from the mountain, and the mountain burned in fire, and the 2 tables of the covenant were in my hands. So it's very clear that the 10 Commandments are the commandments of the covenant. 10 Commandments are the law of the covenant. And when Jesus was asked about what is the great principles of the 10 Commandments, anyone remember what he says? It's based upon 2. What's the first? Yeah, love God supremely. And what's the second? Love your neighbors yourself. And so the principles of these 10 Commandments is love to God supreme and love your fellow human created beings. And that is expressed in the 10 Commandments. So 2 Chronicles 6 says, and there I have put in the ark, in which is the covenant of the Lord, which he made with the children of Israel. 1 Kings 8. Nothing was in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone, which Moses put there at Horeb, when the Lord made a covenant with the children of Israel when he came out of the land of Egypt. So in chapter 25, God says, the God of the covenant says, I want to tabernacle with you. You're not only my people, but I'm not going to run away. I want to be with you. So make this tabernacle, set up a priesthood. Here's the furniture, here's the dimensions, here are the services you have, and you're going to have an ark. And the law of our covenant, our agreement that we have between us, that law, based on the 2 principles of love supreme to God and love to your fellow men, that law is to be inside that ark with the mercy seat and the Shekinah glory, which is my presence. So the law of the covenant is the 10 Commandments. And that's what we find in the Bible. So we have the setting of the covenant, we have the God of the covenant, we have the people of the covenant, and we have now the law of the covenant. We don't generally cover number E. E is the judgments of the covenant. And when you usually think of that word judgment, you think of a court setting. And so I looked at it, and other translations say ordinances or statutes or laws. These are the guiding principles of the 10 Commandments being lived out. How does God want you to live out the 10 Commandments? And we could have a discussion here today. How should we live out the 10 Commandments in St. John's? What should we be deciding on how we should live that out in relationship to God and to our fellow men? So the chapters 21 to 24, you will cover these expressions. And it's interesting, and I listed some of them a little later, but if you turn your Bible to chapter 21, you can see where they begin. And it's some very significant things happen in chapter 4 where it concludes. So in Exodus chapter 24, verses 4 to 8, Moses wrote all the words of the Lord. And he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood, put it in a basin, half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant. And you say, what's the book and the covenant? Well, if he's talking about the covenant, the 2 components that's been covered so far in the book of the covenant would be the giving of the 10 Commandments and these judgments or these principles of coming out of the 10 Commandments. And that is the only thing I can see that would be included in the book of the covenant. But it's a possibility it had a preamble, and God would, because he did include, you've seen how I brought you out of Egypt, and I brought you to me as an eagle brings her hen, and I not only delivered you, I provided you water and food and protection, and I brought you to myself. So it says, he took the book of the covenant. and he read it in the hearing of the people. And here is where the people now say, all that the Lord has said, I will do. They never said that earlier. Now, in chapter 19, when Moses is up in the mountain, and God tells Moses what he's going to do, and wants to make the children of Israel a great nation, he tells the elders that, and they said, well, all the Lord has said we will do. But that's even before he pronounces the Ten Commandments. Then he pronounces the Ten Commandments, and how do the people respond? No, the people are terrified. They said, Moses, don't let God speak to us, we'll die. And he says, no, just calm down. He's just showing you his power. When you see his mighty power, it used to be like in my day, my dad would take his belt off, turn it around, and snap it. He didn't have to do anything more. I knew exactly what that snap meant. When you see your parents put that switch on top of the door or do something, say, oh, okay, I know what's coming if I mess up, so I better be good here. God wants that wholesome fear in your life. It's a fear of someone who loves you, not the fear of someone that wants to hurt you. But you need and I need to have wholesome fear of the potential of what God can do if we mess up, if we choose to rebel against him. So then after giving the Ten Commandments, the people don't respond. He then gives the statutes or the judgments, ordinances. That's chapter 1, 2, chapter 21, 22, and 23, and 24. And at the end of that, Moses takes that book of the covenant that includes the Ten Commandments and these judgments, and he says to the people, and they said, all that the Lord has now said, we'll be happy to do, and be obedient. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled the people. So he not only took the blood and put it on the altar, but he takes the blood and sprinkles the people. And we'll come back to that because that's the ratification of the covenant, the shedding of blood for the ratification of covenant. And that's why it's important as a type for Jesus coming, because it's by the shedding of his blood, Jesus says the new covenant is ratified. So in Deuteronomy chapter 31, 24 to 26, and it was when Moses had completed writing the words of the law in a book, when he had finished, that Moses commanded the Levites who bore the ark of the covenant, saying, take this book of the law, put it in beside the ark of the covenant in the Lord your God, that it may be there as a witness against you. Now, what is different here about how the book of the law was put into the ark and the law of the covenant put into the ark? The law of God that was pronounced in Sinai, where was that to be put as far as the ark of God was concerned with the mercy seat and the Shekinah glory? Where was the law of God placed? Inside the ark. Now here we have the law. We have the book of the law, which is not 10 Commandments. The book of the law. Where was it to be placed as it relates to the ark of the covenant?
Beside the ark.
Beside the ark. That's right. It was put beside the ark. Now, most of us have not studied what the judgments were all about, the application of the Ten Commandments in chapters 21 to 24. And these are part of the covenant. I think we need to step back and say, remember, there's a setting for the covenant. That goes right back to Egypt when they are delivered. There is the God of the covenant and how he's a deliverer, provider, and protector. There is the people of the covenant. God has chosen the descendants of Abraham. Jacob's 12 boys become the nation. So the people of the covenant. There is the law of this arrangement, and that's the Ten Commandments. Then there are statutes or judgments, and these are found in chapters 21 to 24. So in your handout, I've outlined what the basic content is, and it's interesting to see, and you can read it, how God was interested concerning servants and animals, property, principles, justice, the annual feasts. These are the things that are outlined. So in chapters 21, you'll find the law concerning servants, how they were to relate to servants. 12 to 27, the law concerning violence that takes place. The laws further in 21, the laws controlling animals. And chapters 22, the responsibility of property. Chapters 22, 16 to 31, the moral and ceremonial principles. Chapters 23, 1 to 13, justice for all. 14 to 19, the 3 annual feasts. They were to come up to before God, wherever he asked it to take place. There were 3 times the men were supposed to come together in particular worship. And then chapter 23, 20 to 33, God's angel of the promise, talking about the Messiah that was going to lead them, which would be Jesus. And then chapter 4, 1 to 8, the ratifying of this covenant. And that's what we just read up on the top. But if you turn to chapter 24, let's just take a look at that, because it's very, very interesting, and you see how it's the wrapping up of what the covenant's all about. In chapter 24, verse 3, so Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has said we will do. The elders said it before the 10 Commandments were given, when they knew what God was going to do, making them a great nation, a special people. The people don't respond until after they hear these judgments. Verse 4 says, and Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes. He offers burnt offering on these. And verse 6, he takes half of the blood, puts it in a basin, half the blood he sprinkles on the altar. And verse 7 and 8 is the key verses here. He takes the book of the covenant, and we assume the book of the covenant includes the 10 Commandments and these judgments. He read them in the hearing of the people and they said, all that the Lord has said we will do. Moses takes the blood, sprinkles it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant, which the Lord has made with you according to all of these words. So it's a beautiful picture there of God taking the initiative. And, sometimes you wrestle with, is it right for me to do this, or is it wrong for me to do this? What would God want me to do? So it's beautiful that in chapters 1 to 24, God tells them how he wants them to live. He gives them principles to live by. He gets right into the nitty-gritty of life and says, here are the principles I want you to live towards taking care of your animals, towards your servants, towards taking care of property. Here are the basic principles on how you should live. You've been a slave. Now you're going to become a great nation, and this is how I want you to live. And by the way, 2 great principles here. Love me supreme, and live the golden rule before people. So under F, the book of the covenant. So Moses came to the people and gave the words, and we just read that. And he has an offering, he sprinkles the altar, and he sprinkles the people and enters into a covenant. So the ratification of the covenant under G, the ratification of the covenant is through the shedding of blood. H, what we haven't usually talked about when it comes to the covenants given in Sinai is that God, he wants his presence to be with his people. And part of the covenant that God has with his people is, I want to tabernacle with you. If you love someone, you want to be with them. And you say, God wants that? I mean, people want that, but does God really want that? Well, where did your desire come from? Who created you? God has put in your heart a desire to be loved and a desire to love. And when you love someone, you really love someone, you want to be with them. Presence is very much a part of intimacy. Presence, doing things together, is very much a part of intimacy. And so now you move from the early parts of Exodus, which is the setting of the covenant, You've seen what I've done to the Egyptians, how I brought you to me as on eagle's wings. I delivered you from Egypt, took you through the Red Sea, provided food, provided water, protected you, and I brought you to Sinai to be my people. Will you enter into covenant with me? And all that the Lord has said, the elders said, we will do. He gives the 10 commandments. The people tremble. God gives them the judgments, guidelines of how these are lived out. And after that, the people say, sure, we will trust that God. But Moses, you speak to us. God, too tough to hear you personally. God, you speak to Moses, he will speak to us. And that then is ratified with the shedding of blood. Once that takes place, you have chapter 25 in Exodus. And chapter 25 in Exodus is God's desire now to be with his people. In verses 1 to 9, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they bring me an offering from everyone who gives it willingly. With his heart you shall take my offering. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them, according to all that I show you, that is the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings, and you shall make it. So if he had said to the people, hey, make me a sanctuary, in their minds, the only sanctuaries they have in mind would be the worship places in Egypt, right? So they would make something that looked like a pagan temple. And God says, I will give you the descriptions. I will tell you what this tabernacle is supposed to be like. But you make me a tabernacle so I can dwell in your midst. What a principle. Now, what does this say about what's to be their attitude in bringing the things that are needed in this tabernacle? What's to be their attitude? According to this verse. For everyone who gives it how? Willingly, yes. Willingly. A willing offering is the only kind of offering God will accept. You give it willingly, cheerfully, not grudgingly. You give it from a cheerful heart of praise and thanksgiving. It's a delight to give to the Lord. That's the kind of offering all through the Bible. God says, you think I want your lambs and your goats and your first fruits? I don't need them. I already own the world. Why do I need those? But when it comes from a willing, thankful heart, that's the kind of offering. So he says, everyone who has a willing heart, I want them to bring an offering to build my sanctuary, and here's what it's going to look like. So from chapter 25 to chapter 31, God talks about this sanctuary. And he goes through and he talks about every part. Talks about the altar outside of sacrifice. He talks about the candlesticks. He talks about the table of showbread, the altar of insights, and ultimately the 10 Commandments being in the ark. And he'll talk about the size of the court, everything about it. And then he talks about the priests and their apparel. He sanctifies them and sets them apart. And he goes through all of that down to chapter 31. So come over to chapter 31. And verse 18. And when he had made an end of speaking with him, Moses, on Mount Sinai, he gave Moses 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone, written with the finger of God. So you see in chapter 31, if he's talking about, he gives Moses the two tables with the law of the covenant on it, you can see how it really still ties with chapter 19. Anyone know what follows in chapter 32? When Moses has the 10 Commandments in his hand and he's ready to go down to the people. What's happening down there at the base of the mountain?
Golden calf.
There, chapter 32 is the story of the golden calf. That time Moses was up there receiving all of this and coming back and forth to the elders, to the people, talking about the covenant. That's sort of like discovering, and you can YouTube it sometimes, it pops up on you. Unfaithful, what's the word? unfaithful partners at the wedding time. And you'll be amazed at YouTubes of how a partner discovers what their would-to-be spouse did the night before or the week before they get married. And they terminate it on the spot. I've seen one where the groom says, I have a speech to make, everybody. Would everyone take their hand and put it under the pew by where they're sitting? You will find a picture. And it's a picture of his bride in bed the night before with the best man. Totally unfaithful. And so when Moses comes down, he finds the same thing. The people have just said all that the Lord has said we will do. Moses comes down from the ark, from the mount, and what does he find? They're worshiping a golden calf and said, this be the gods that brought you out of Egypt. They didn't fear the Lord very long, did they? They didn't fear the mighty power. The trumpet gets louder and louder, and the mountain shakes, and the smoke is like an atomic bomb, and the voice of the Lord that shook, and they trembled. Fear generally doesn't last as long as love. It doesn't last as long as love. Love is more powerful than fear. And within a few days, they gave up. They were not truthful and honest with all that the Lord has said we will do. And so that we know then is the end, chapter 31, before you go into the story of the golden calf. That is where the covenant on Sinai story ends. You have the setting, deliverance of Israel, the food, the water, the protection coming to Sinai. And you have God telling Moses he wants them to be a special people, and the elders saying all the Lord has said we will do. And then the people are to prepare for 3 days. They are to wash their clothes. They are to sanctify themselves. They come up to the mountain. God speaks the 10 commandments of the love relationship he wants with them, presenting the principles that will keep their happiness, to protect them against evil. And the people don't respond. They're shaken. And they said, Moses, you speak to us. We can't take this God. And he says, God's testing you. You need to see that you're not playing with a wimp. God has ability here, and he wants you not only to love him, but to have wholesome fear as well. And then he gives the judgments from chapters 21 to 24. And Moses sacrifices and ratifies the book of the covenant. And the people have said all that the Lord has said we will do. That adds that component. And then chapter 25, God says, I want to tabernacle with you. If you have a willing heart, bring these items so that I can make a tabernacle, because I want to be with you. And I want you to worship me and be a part of my people. And so you have then chapters 25 to 31, you have the establishment of the sanctuary. And at the end of chapter 31, Moses ratifies this by saying, he takes the 2 tables of the testimony. So what's the relation of the 10 commandments to the covenant? What's the relation of the 10 commandments to the covenant? With the mask, can't quite hear. What's the relationship of the 10 commandments to the covenant? It's the guiding law. The 10 commandments are the guiding law. It's the law of the covenant. It's not the covenant, but it's the law of the covenant. Yes, go ahead.
It's the written, the word of God's will.
Yes. Yes. It's the written expression of God's will. Yes. How do you know you should live? Well, read the 10 commandments. And read the judgments. He gives the principles. Those principles are universal. They apply to everybody. And they're for all time. There's never a generation that wouldn't need the 10 commandments. It's always for universal application. That's important. Now, we're going to spend a whole lesson on the sign of the covenant. But just before we get to the end of chapter 31, this is very interesting. If you come back up to verse 12 in chapter 31, we have this statement in verses 12 to 18. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, My Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. You shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. Therefore the children of Israel kept the Sabbath, observed the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It's a sign between me and the children of Israel forever, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth. Oh, so then it says, not only do we have a God of the covenant and the law of the covenant, but these verses tell what else do we have? Besides the law of the covenant, the people of the covenant, the God of the covenant, we now have a what? The sign of the covenant. So what is the sign of the covenant? Yeah, according to this verse, it says it's the Sabbath. The keeping of the Sabbath is the sign. It's a sign between you and me forever that I am the God who created the heavens and the earth. So we not only have the law of the covenant, which would be all 10 commandments, but God selects the fourth law in the fourth statute in that covenant law, and says, this is the one that will be a sign, and that is the keeping of the Sabbath.
It also says, verse 13, that ye may know that I am the Lord that sanctifies you.
And what does that tell you? That it's the Lord that sanctifies you.
He makes me right with God the Father. Jesus has made me right with God the Father.
Yes. That's beautiful. Not only is it a sign between us, because I'm creator, but it's a sign because I sanctify you. And Larry says that he is the one that takes the responsibility to bring us into harmony with him, to sanctify us. And that's so important because sometimes you and I think, what do I have to do to bring myself in harmony with God? And God says, wait a minute. That's my court. I'll tell you what you have to do. And if I bring it to your attention, that means I feel it's time for you to respond to it. And if I bring it to your attention, it also means I provide the power and ability so you can do it. It'll be my living out my life in you.
Also, he is the creator of everything.
Yes.
And he shows the smartest people today, the Darwinists and all that people, all those people thinks, came billions of years ago and all this stuff, that God is the one who created heaven and earth. 6 days, and that's what he meant, 6 days, that's what he meant.
Yes.
And apparently, for the brains of people like that don't understand that, I can understand it either.
Yes.
Why do you don't understand it?
Yes.
It's so simple. Probably it's too simple.
Yes. Good. So it's important. The Bible teaches at least three reasons why we should remember the seventh-day Sabbath. We just talked about one here. Remember the Sabbath day because it's telling you that I am the Lord that sanctifies. It's a sign that I am the one that sanctifies you. Can you think of another reason why we should keep the Sabbath? Exodus 20 says, worship me because I am the creator. So worship me because I'm the one that sanctifies you. Worship me because I'm the creator. There's one other one that's in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy. And it's the parallel of Exodus 20. And the fourth commandment says, worship me because I delivered you from slavery. I'm your deliverer. So we don't thank God because he delivered us from slavery, but based on 1 Peter 2:9, because he called us out, delivered us out of darkness into his marvelous light. So he delivered us too. So the principles of deliverance. So Exodus 20 says, worship me because I'm the creator. Exodus 31 says, worship me because I'm the one that sanctifies you. And then the third one is worship me because I'm your deliverer. Those are three principles behind the commandments. Well, we have to stop now. We have about a minute left. I added, because as I studied, I start to say, well, the Bible talks about the book of the covenant. All right, that's the 10 commandments and these judgments. But it also talks about a book of the law. And so in the appendix, when you go home, it talks about the book of the law. And in the story of Nehemiah, you have Ezra read the book of the law of Moses. And it says in verse 3 that I've highlighted, he read the book in the open square from morning till noon. Well, the book of the law then has to be more than the book of the covenant, because the book of the covenant you can read in probably 15 minutes. So he read from morning till noon. So that's the book of the law. So the book of the law is not the same as the book of the covenant. The book of the law, when you studied it, and you go down further in verse 14, it lists the feasts are there, and it goes through some of the things that were read. And so if you go and do a little search on it, you will find that the first 5 books of Moses are known as the book of the law, the books of the law, the Pentateuch, the Torah. And the book of Deuteronomy is the second law. So it's a good possibility, and you can go further on it, the book of the law would be the book of Deuteronomy. And if he read it for about 4 hours or so, it definitely is more than a couple chapters in the book of Exodus. So here from the word Torah, the Hebrew word for the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible is Torah, which means law. Refers to the same 5 books termed as in English called the Pentateuch, 5. Deuteronomy is the 5th book of the Torah and the Bible's Old Testament. When translated into Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the word Deuteronomy means second law, and as Moses gave it. So when you step into this subject of the covenants, it's just beautiful to see God says, I will take the initiative to show that you love me, that I love you. Will you be willing to respond? I will do the work. But you know, there's a principle. He who loves the least has the power. And unfortunately, we have often been loving him the least. And we set up circumstances that makes it really difficult for God's love. But he keeps coming after us like a tsunami, reaching out to us. Can't I demonstrate to you, won't you accept how much I love you? I want you to be my people. What a privilege we have today to have the demonstration of the New Testament. God demonstrated his love to us in the New Testament times in that he gave Jesus to die for us. May we be a people not resistant, not stubborn, but we will say all the Lord has said, we will be happy to do, because we have a loving God that he has demonstrated his love to us. Loving Father, we just want to thank you for the Old Testament that shows the demonstration of your love for us. And we know that you want to enter a covenant with us as well, that may our homes be like a sanctuary, may our church be like a sanctuary, where you can feel comfortable with your people and we will worship you, love you, and respond in obedience to you. In Jesus' name, amen.